Thank you for joining us this week on Bottom Line. Here on the panel to talk about the news of the week is Sugata Mukherjee, the editor of the Triangle Business Journal, and Will Doran, a political beat reporter with the Raleigh News and Observer. Sugata, our hearts and prayers are thinking about the people of Texas and Mississippi, Louisiana, Hurricane Harvey, devastating impact on that part of the country. But a little bit of what's happening there in terms of how coverage is provided for people that have had flood losses certainly should be of interest here in North Carolina because we are also so susceptible to hurricane activity.
Absolutely, and that's sort of what we looked at this week as to what is happening with this National Flood Insurance Program because, as you know, back in the Katrina days, there were about 5 out of 10 homeowners were covered under the flood insurance. So part of the reason being is how New Orleans area was, and many parts were actually literally under the sea level.
Right.
Well, Houston did not have that issue, therefore most people were not in the flood zones. And what has happened now is the estimates are beginning to come out saying like less than 2 out of 10 people had flood insurance. Now, we have all seen the pictures. You can only imagine the devastation and damage, not only with personal property, but also, you know, what is going to happen leading up to 5 years, 10 years. This flood insurance program itself has a big problem. And the biggest problem really is 20 to 30% of the money that is in the flood insurance goes to homeowners that pay about 1% of the total premiums. Now, think about this. How does it work then? How will you make the math work? So obviously when Congress comes back next week, they will probably do something about the folks in Texas, and they're going to start a stopgap measure. But in a broader sense, in a business sense, in an economic sense, which means a lot to North Carolinians, as you pointed out, we do have to look into whether this flood insurance, National Flood Insurance Program works. And just by doing the math, they have $25 billion in loans they need to pay back to the federal government. Most of them came from the Katrina. So Katrina was what, 12 years ago?
Yeah.
In 12 years, they haven't had a chance to pay back the Katrina loans. You can only imagine what will happen after Harvey. So, I mean, this program needs serious work because it means to every North Carolinian, because we are used to flood and wind for sure.
Well, one of the things we look at in terms of North Carolina's economic landscape of how proud we are that we continue to grow as a state, but having worked in the state agency that dealt to a large extent with the aftermath of Hurricane Floyd and Fran, we've grown in a way that puts more physical losses in the potential hazard areas that simply weren't there when we had storms in the late 90s. So the profile of loss in North Carolina could be even more significant now should we have an event as cataclysmic as Harvey has been.
I totally agree. You know, development is causing much of the issues with this flood insurance program. You look at, you know, I'm assuming that a vast majority of North Carolinians who have flood insurance are probably they live in the coast. But what happens when that water starts coming down? We have gone through this,
right.
And it is getting worse and worse across the country because development. In some ways, the subsidized flood insurance program may be the reason why more people are going into flood-prone coastal areas and building up stuff because it does not cost them much money.
Well, from a conversation about floodplain maps to maps for the state legislature, the legislature's been in session this week and talking a little bit about a number of things, including redistricting. Give us a recap, Will.
Yeah, the legislature has passed their new maps, and it is now to the courts. Obviously, we're only doing this whole redistricting thing in the first place because federal judges ruled our current lines to be unconstitutional. They were racial gerrymanders, and so we have to send our new maps back to the same judges that ruled the current ones unconstitutional. The deadline for that was Friday, so they got it done just in the nick of time here, and now we'll just kind of wait and see. Assuming that they do get approved by the judges, there will be some changes going on. Several legislators have been double bunked, which basically means that they are now in the same district with a fellow incumbent. Some of them will have primary challenges in 2018. Some of them have already said that they plan to actually move to a new district because the maps did create some districts that were empty that didn't have an incumbent in them. So we've heard from probably 4 or 5 legislators at this point that they're planning on moving, and some people saying that they're just going to go ahead and resign because they just, it doesn't really look like the odds are in their favor. Senator Bill Cook from out in northeastern North Carolina was probably the most prominent that we've heard.
So that is only if the court approves this,
Correct.
correct?
Correct.
So I think the more interesting play is what if they don't?
Right. And that's the question. Probably what would happen in that case is that the court would come up with new maps themselves. And now when I say that, I don't mean that the judges are going to, pull an all-nighter and, be sitting down there with the maps and drawing them. No. They would hire some sort of outside expert to draw them themselves. And keep in mind,
at that point, it's out of the legislator's hands.
right, exactly.
That's what they don't want, of course, right?
Right, and there's been a lot of political talk on both sides. The Republicans are saying, hey, these maps fully comply with the court's order and we fully expect them to pass. The Democrats have been saying, we're not so sure about this, and we think there's a pretty big chance that these are going to get thrown out. Of course, the maps have been drawn by the same consultant that drew the current unconstitutional lines, which is something that irked a lot of critics of this new redistricting.
Well, you cover this. How would you handicap this?
I could see maybe the judges just not wanting to get involved. There's always, people don't like activist judges, and not saying that it would make them activist judges, but I'm sure if they did, step in and throw these out, they would hear a lot of those kind of complaints. And you also have to realize that we're going to be doing this again in a few years. You have to redistrict after every single census. There's a census coming up in 2020. So whatever happens now, it's only going to get used for the 2018 and the 2020 elections, and then we'll start over again in 2021, and we'll probably be back in court no matter what happens.
To some extent, that's what makes this important.
Yeah.
Because whatever happens, it can actually affect not only 2018, but who gets to draw the 2020 following 2020.
Exactly. Exactly.
Real quickly, as we wrap up this segment, any other things the legislature took up this week?
Yeah, something that could be of interest to people out in eastern North Carolina. They allocated around just under $500,000 today to deal with Gen X, which is a pollutant that's been found in the Cape Fear River, apparently stemming from a plant in Fayetteville that's been possibly, polluting drinking water down in Fayetteville and Wilmington and that whole southeastern area. They're starting to look into that. They also repealed a ban on plastic bags in the Outer Banks. Republicans were in favor of that, saying it doesn't work to protect turtles, which was the original reasoning behind the ban. And they said it was just basically an undue burden on some of the businesses there that had to create new systems for kind of tracking bags and things like that.
We're all for turtles.